Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction. Proverbs 24:6. By wise guidance you can wage your war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Passages Pulse. My name is Sebastian. At the time of this recording, it is 2 p.m. Eastern Time on June 18, 2025. My name is Sebastian once again, and I'm here with my co-host who's back with us, Josiah. Welcome back. It's great to see you. As I think a lot of our listeners know, you were waiting to have your baby. So give us some news on that front.
He's here. He's here. Yeah, he is a very healthy baby boy. Thank you for bringing it up again, Sebastian, reminding me of the joyous occasion. It's good to be back. Did miss being with you and the podcast family the last couple of weeks, but it was a really sweet time getting to take some time off and just love on the family for a bit.
Well, we're really happy to hear that. I'm glad that baby is here. So really happy for you and your wife. For those of you who were waiting on baby tracking, he is here. And I joked before with you. One day that baby is going to be on this podcast, maybe 18 years from now. So excited about that. But while you were away, some big things happened. Today, we're going to be unfolding the historic attack, the preemptive attack that Israel has started. Should be called a new war. I hope you agree. This is the new Israel-Iran war. And, last week we brought you an emergency episode while we were in Washington, D.C. with one of our guides. But today we want to help you all out, listeners and people watching this, by giving you a compact update of what has happened, have been some of the consequences, and what we can expect in the near future. Israel has claimed to hit over 1,000 targets in Iranian soil. Meanwhile, Iran has retaliated with somewhere between 400 to 500 ballistic missiles at Israel. So we're going to talk about what's going on. Josiah, please tell us first, what has Israel accomplished so far? And by the way, let's start, if you could please just frame the operation, the war, what is it called? And then we'll go from there on what Israel has accomplished.
Sure. So the operation, depending on how you translate it, is something like Strength of a Lion or Rising Lion, something along those lines. It's a pretty ambitious operation. What Israel set out to do essentially was launch a preemptive strike, which would, in theory, destroy Iran's nuclear program, which had been progressing to levels and in ways or in certain types that could be used for a nuclear weapon. That, again, is a very ambitious goal that Israel set out to do. I think what's very interesting about this operation is that it didn't just target Israel's nuclear program or nuclear facilities, enrichment facilities. It really was immediately and continues to be a pretty wide-ranging operation that's trying to do several things or target several different types of weapons programs or militarization, terrorism in Iran. So I'll give you a few examples. Obviously, if you've been following the news over the last, let's call it 5 days, there has been quite a bit of activity in and around different nuclear facilities. Natanz being a really good example of this, although there are a few others which have also been attacked. It's not just that, though. You're also seeing that Israel was going after different leaders within Iran's military leadership, within the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. It also went after different scientists involved with Iran's nuclear program, and did its best to not just decapitate the ability to enrich uranium, but also assassinate, essentially, individuals who are involved with the process of building a nuclear weapon or might be involved in the process of launching or approving the launch of a nuclear weapon. You also saw them going after the missiles which would be necessary to launch that weapon, as well as those that were being launched against Israel in retaliation. These are primarily of a ballistic missile nature. There have been a few cruise missiles, but primarily ballistic missiles, and then a large number of drones as well. So Israel was going after those, their stockpiles of those weapons, the launch sites where you would fire those at Israel, as well as some of the factories where you produce different components for these things. Israel also targeted uh, different different facilities, I should say, which are associated with the regime, the Islamic regime of Iran, not necessarily with the military wing, but things like a state television network or the internal security headquarters or a police headquarters or intelligence, different components of the Islamic regime that are actually primarily focused on oppressing Iranians. Israel targeted those as well. And then there have been a very small number of targets on different forms of energy or economic infrastructure as well. So it's pretty wide ranging in terms of what Israel has tried to accomplish up until this point. Now, there's a couple of caveats that I want to give people, though, in terms of understanding how much has Israel actually accomplished, given how ambitious this operation has been up until this point. The first is that Israel is not to the end of it. It hasn't actually destroyed Iran's nuclear program. While it's very impressive what Israel has done up until this point, it hasn't actually destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. And we can explain maybe more in a few minutes about what would be necessary to finish the job. But they're somewhere in the middle, not at the end of the job at this point. They are, by most estimates and reports, ahead of schedule. So it's not like they're behind schedule or failing necessarily, but they're still in the middle of the job rather than having totally finished it. One of the reasons why is because Israel has been focused not just on demilitarizing Iran in very specific ways, but also on protecting itself from various forms of retaliation that Iran might choose to engage in, especially firing ballistic missiles at Israel. So what you can see as they're going about these different waves of airstrikes in Iran is that it's pretty rare that one attack against Iran or one wave of airstrikes is exclusively focused on one target or even one type of target. Typically, you're seeing some sequencing where they're taking out, one missile launcher and another nuclear facility and also a certain number of leaders or things like that at the same time. And what they're doing is basically staggering these different attacks so that as they go, as they make more progress in destroying more of the weapons that they don't want Iran to have, they are also preemptively or proactively trying to address what they think will be the retaliation for those efforts. So it slows the process down a little bit, but what it's supposed to do is help Israel ensure that Iran can't fight back so much that Israel has to stop the war before the job is done. At this point, I would say the most impressive thing that Israel has accomplished is that they have essentially complete air superiority over the capital of Iran. You can find videos online of them flying drones around Tehran, flying airplanes over the capital city, and of course, Iranian air defenses continue to fire, but they're left with their defenses that are not very effective, which means that Israel can basically fly in and out of Iranian airspace at will whenever they want to. And that's very impressive. It means that they have an extremely dominant position to work from right now. Doesn't mean that it's a guarantee that they will win this war having accomplished all of their objectives, but it is a very advantageous position for Israel right now.
Well, speaking of the people they have targeted, we're going to include a lot of resources for you guys in this podcast. So do take a look at the notes because if you want to learn more, we have other recommendations, including our own video that we did about Iran. Right? It's called Israel Explained series. It's on our YouTube
Hmm.
channel, and Josiah and Avery have done a video explaining our history with Iran or the history of Iran and Israel. So one of the group of people that they took out is, if Israel had attacked Iran immediately all the military would have started ordering the response with the missiles. But what Israel did is that they took away all the people who would have been able to make those decisions. So there's nobody to make that call, and then Israel was able to take out the defenses. So these
Yeah,
people are called the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Apparently, Israel somehow send them a meeting request and send them to a bunker, a bunch of these people together for a meeting that was a fake. And Israel was able to eliminate all of them from one bunker. This is a reporting by an Israeli journalist named Amit Sigal. So, Josiah, tell us the difference between what is this army? So, I have two questions for you. One, who is this IRGC? How is it different from other armies of the world? And second, why is Israel targeting scientists, and is that fair game?
sure. Maybe one note about the secret meeting. I think that was probably members of the Air Force actually that were called together for that. Would be usually they would be primarily responsible for ballistic missile launches, but the point stands that one of the things that Israel did first was assassinate a bunch of people so that one they couldn't go into hiding. That includes both the officials or military officers responsible for ballistic missiles and and the scientists. And then the second thing they did was try to, or rather, the second reason why they did this was to try to prevent them from launching ballistic missiles. Now, when it comes to the IRGC, how is it different? The IRGC is different from a traditional military in the sense that it operates somewhat like a paramilitary organization. Iran actually has two militaries. They have a traditional military, the chief of staff, who was assassinated during the initial preemptive strike last Thursday. His replacement also was later assassinated, so I believe they're on their third since this war started now. You also have a second, less traditional military known as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This group is a creation of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and the regime that still holds power after that revolution in Iran up until today. And its purpose is to protect the regime not just from external threats, but also from internal threats. So it is supposed to be helping export the ideals of the Islamic Revolution abroad, around the Middle East. It's responsible for a lot of the arming and training of different terror organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah, the Houthis. But at the same time, it's also responsible to protect the regime from internal threats like dissidents or those who might try to overthrow the regime from within Iran. So it's a pretty unique organization in that respect. The question about nuclear scientists in terms of why would you choose to attack nuclear scientists because what did they do to hurt you essentially? That's a fair question, but you have to understand these nuclear scientists were responsible not just for developing nuclear material for civilian purposes or for the use of creating domestic energy like an electricity plant or something like that. What they were doing was helping Iran figure out how to develop uranium beyond the levels necessary in order to create domestic energy production. And this is actually one of the big key sticking points of the negotiations that President Trump was having with the Iranian leadership over the last few months. The question of should Iran be allowed to enrich uranium on its own soil or not? And the position of the US administration was no, because there's no legitimate reason why you would need to enrich uranium on Iranian soil if all you're trying to do is produce energy at a nuclear power plant. The only logical, rational reason why you would need to enrich uranium, especially to the levels that the Iranian regime has been for the last several years, is if you're trying to produce something that is weapons grade or a high enough quality that you can put it in a nuclear weapon. The scientists involved have been those who are trying to help Iran enrich uranium to those levels that it could be of a high enough quality you could use it for a nuclear weapon. And not just that, they were also involved in helping to figure out how do you not just generate that material, but then put it into a bomb, essentially. Just having high quality uranium doesn't mean you have a nuclear weapon. You have to figure out how to build an explosive device and a trigger, a mechanism that can actually create the nuclear reaction with this material that creates a nuclear weapon. And squeezing all of that into a bomb is actually not very easy to do. So these scientists were presumably part of that project. Israeli intelligence reports are that they believe these scientists were making a more concerted effort than they had been in the past to not just create nuclear material, but weaponize that material and create a bomb out of it. So that's why these scientists were part of the target during the operation on Thursday.
Yeah. So one little meta comment here. This is one of the biggest, what do you call it, progressions in Western civilization. The civilian control of the military is key. In the United States, the army is not loyal to the president. The army is loyal to the United States Constitution. And in Iran, when it comes to the IRGC, that's not the case. They're loyal to the supreme leader, and that's
Mhm.
why they're so dangerous. And the scientist's point, I wanted to start highlighting what's at stake here for Israel. It's another Holocaust. Israel, people sometimes mistakenly say that Israel is exists because of the Holocaust. The opposite is true. The Holocaust happened because we didn't have Israel, because Jewish people didn't have a state to defend themselves. So 6 million Jews were massacred. Today, the Jewish people have an army, they have a military, they have an air force, and they're going. We're about to go into the consequences. So imagine those missiles that are flying into Israel right now. If there were nuclear missiles, Israel would be wiped off the map, and we'll have another Holocaust of the Jewish people. And that's what Israel is trying to prevent. So, why don't we go into
Mhm.
that, Josiah? What have been some of the consequences on both sides? What have been some of the consequences on the ground in Iran? What are the consequences in Israeli society right now?
So in Iran, it's been what you would expect. There's been a lot of damage done. About 200 lives lost, according to the latest reports I was able to read, and large scale evacuations of places like Tehran, the capital city of Iran. So it's been significant. I mean, you don't want to downplay the consequences for the civilians. Israel has, as in the case of most of its other recent operations against Hamas or Hezbollah, tried to give evacuation warnings to civilians, but still, it's very difficult for that many civilians to try to evacuate at once. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of traffic in Tehran and things like that as people try to get away with the violence or get out of the way as the violence unfolds. In Israel itself, it's really particularly, I think, alarming to see the visuals of what's happened. So you have, of course, examples where people have homes destroyed, or you have parking lots on fire, things like that. These are kinds of things that I don't think people expected necessarily when Israel was talking about the buildup to this preemptive strike on Iran. Most people assumed that it would be something similar to what happened in April and October of 2024 when there was this back and forth round of shooting twice, actually, between Israel and Iran. People assumed that the third round after this preemptive strike would be similar. Iran would fire a bunch of ballistic missiles, Israel would intercept them, and that would be the end of it. But the Israeli government and security establishment actually said pretty early on that they knew ahead of time that that was not going to be the case. The Because this was it's supposed to be a big surprise attack, the degree of coordination and assistance that they were going to get from other countries in terms of intercepting Iranian missiles was not as high as it was last year. They also knew that Iran had learned several things because of the previous two attacks and was starting to get better and smarter about how they use their ballistic missiles. And they estimated that there was going to be hundreds of people that would die as a result of Iran's ballistic missile response to Israel's strikes in Iran. That thankfully did not turn out to be the case, that it was that bad, but the government and the security establishment, I think, was pretty heads up and aware that there was going to be consequences for launching a campaign this widespread against Iran. What's actually happened, if you take a look at the numbers in Israel, is not as bad as what was estimated or predicted to happen, but it's still very serious as a result of this war. So you have, at the time we were recording this, I believe about 24 people have lost their lives in Israel as a result of direct impacts. There certainly has been a much higher number of direct missile impacts in Israel than in the previous rounds of fighting. And unfortunately, several of them have been in pretty dense urban areas or residential areas. So you can see photos of buildings, for example, that are missing one of their sides or are in partial collapse because of a missile impact, either direct or nearby. You have something like 800 people considered to be wounded or injured as a result of these strikes. You have somewhere around 4,000 people that have had to evacuate or have just completely lost their home as a result of the missile impacts. And then you have over, I think 18,000 was the number that I received, damage claims reported to the Israeli tax authority. So people who, this includes people who've lost their home, but also people who are still in their home but have experienced some damage, like a window blown out or something as a result of a missile impact. So it's pretty serious. These are not small numbers of people that are having to deal with the consequences of being at war with Iran, but the Israeli security establishment and the governments of Israel made a conscious decision that it was worth it in their estimation, that Iran needed to be stopped, and it was going to be a painful choice, but a choice that needed to be made to launch a preemptive strike.
Yeah. So we imagine once again these missiles that have been launched at Israel, hundreds of them. Again, this is what was at stake for Israel. If in the future Iran were to have nuclear weapons in using missiles like this, it would be the end of the Israeli state. It would be a Holocaust of the Jewish people. If and don't think that they wouldn't use it, because everything that Iran has done for the last 40 years is terrorize Jewish people and people around the Middle East with their proxies like Hezbollah, the Houthis in Syria, allowing the Syrian regime to kill hundreds of thousands of its own citizens, targeting Israelis through Hamas by supporting them. So these people are serious. They're fanatical, and they just simply cannot allow to. We can allow them to have a nuclear weapon. Um, so that's what's been happening. Thank you for that update. Of course, we'll keep bringing this up. But now let's move to another question of why now. Israel has been, if the Americans have been negotiating with Iran, they were supposed to negotiate last Sunday. I was talking to you a little earlier about the name of this thing, which is called Rising Lion. One of the names, the translations, because of course this military operation is named in Hebrew, but
Mhm.
when you translate it, it just so happens that the Iranian Persian flag, the flag that was used before the Islamic Revolution, was a rising sun with a lion, a rising lion. And another fun fact, again, friends, this is just me, just being fun, that this happened on
Mhm.
6/13. This happened on June 13, which is the number of mitzvot in the Torah, the number of commandments that Moses gave to the Israeli people, 613. That's pure coincidence. That's my Sebastian fun fact of the day. But Josiah, tell us the serious reason. Why did this happen now? And before you say that, like the 6 Day War, let us remind ourselves, it started with a preemptive strike. Israel went into Egypt. They got information that Egypt was about to attack them, so they decided to preemptively take out the Egyptian Air Force. Israel just did the same, this time with Iran. Why now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like where you're going with this lion imagery. I think it's pretty interesting, actually. I think my interpretation is something closer to biblical imagery than a reference to the Persian flag. There's all kinds of scripture references to a lion, the strength of a lion, the Lion of Judah, things like this. So there's definitely, I think, something there maybe that they're being intentional about when they name this operation. In terms of why now, there's a few things going on here, I think. So just a bit of context I think we need to sort of unpack. If you want to know all of the history of the relationship between Israel and Iran, definitely I would encourage you to watch the video that Sebastian mentioned, our Israel Explained episode. You'll get a lot more context. I'm going to start at October 7th though, because I think we need to, for the sake of time, try to limit ourselves to exactly how much ground we try to cover. But you have to keep in mind that Iran had been for a couple of decades flirting with this nuclear program, and there's this back and forth efforts to prevent it. It's been a major security concern for Israel for a couple of decades. It's been a concern for the US since at least the Obama administration that tried to enter into a nuclear agreement with Iran. And it had been kind of set to the side a little bit in terms of how much attention we gave it after October 7th, because on October 7th, everyone realized, okay, the existential threat that is immediately in front of us is from Hamas, which was weird that a relatively small terror organization that was so underestimated was the one that almost brought Israel to its knees. But on October 7th, that really was kind of the main thing that everyone was most paying attention to. What became clear though is you sort of took a step back, and as we thought more about, okay, how did this happen? Why did this happen? It became relatively clear that while Hamas acted on its own accord, it was, of course, armed, supplied, and in part funded by the Islamic regime in Iran. And the other organizations that came to Hamas's defense were also proxies or sponsored by the Islamic regime in Iran. So organizations like Hezbollah or the Houthis. What that means is that the evidence that Iran directly ordered October 7 to happen is very weak, if it even exists. It's almost non-existent. But Iran has, since October 7, acted like a puppet master, pulling strings and trying to manipulate its different proxy networks to attack Israel or to continue to force Israel to stop the war against Hamas. So Israel finds itself in a situation where it is and has been directly confronted by Hamas or indirectly through its proxies since October 7, since the worst existential crisis that it had had in many decades. And it found itself sort of rethinking its military doctrine about whether it should contain threats or directly confront them. Whereas the strategy prior to October 7 was to contain threats, after October 7, it definitely was to directly confront them and to try to deal with them before they got out of control. So I would say Israel's decision to strike Iran has been building since October 7. It's not like this happened overnight, but there's definitely been this trend in this direction since October 7. In terms of why now, I mean, immediately or within the last week, why did this happen? Two things stand out. One, there was an IAEA report that came out, which basically confirmed IAEA, sorry, is the International Atomic Energy Agency. It's a UN body that basically provides confirmation or verification that different countries are in compliance with restrictions on their nuclear programs, that their nuclear programs are safe and things of that nature. It came out with a report basically saying that Iran is not in compliance and it has been deceiving the international community about their nuclear program, which bolstered Israel's claims that they've been making for years that Iran has a dangerous nuclear program and is not being transparent or truthful about what it is and what it is for. Combined with that, Israel produced intelligence of their own, which again does not necessarily match with the American intelligence community, but it seems as if President Trump has decided to accept it as verifiable or reliable, that Iran was working not just towards enriching uranium, as we mentioned, but also the weaponization of that enriched material. So they were working towards actually making a bomb. And there was also the fact that the deadline expired. So President Trump had been holding Israel back for 3 months, saying no to military operation, even though Israel had been planning for it for quite some time, at least for a couple of years. But he also told Iran that there's a 60-day deadline. And it's not a coincidence that when Iran failed to meet that deadline and failed to meet some pretty strong demands that President Trump was making, some red lines that there would be no enrichment of uranium on Iranian soil, it seems that Israel was given at least a soft green light to go on day 61. So you add this all up, Israel thinks Iran is a threat. It thinks that Iran is, if not directly responsible for, indirectly responsible for October 7. It feels that Iran is producing a nuclear weapon. It knows that Iran has threatened many times to wipe Israel off the map. It also has some now backing from the international community saying, yes, Iran is lying to us about the nuclear program. And it has a deadline that has passed. All of that combined creates this perfect storm where Israel is finally able to make its case to the US administration. Now is the time. We can't wait any longer. Iran is stalling. They're never going to come to the table and actually negotiate with you. We need to do this. We need to apply enough pressure on them to force the issue. And I think that's why you saw everything come together the way that it did last week.
Yeah, I think what we should notice here as Christians, I want to say here that what we're witnessing is miraculous. I think we should take notice that this evil empire that was really built to destroy Israel for the last 40 years. They spend a lot of time and a lot of energy, money. They forsake domestic interests in order to fund terrorism abroad in order to destroy Israel. And we have seen the unraveling of their plans before our eyes in a year, basically, since like last summer until now. We see that there are Bible verses that talk about David, I think, is praying to God for his enemies to fall victim to their own snares. And this is what we have seen with Iran. Iran has spent decades funding Hezbollah and lately also Hamas in Israel. And because of Yahya Sinwar attack on Israel, that led to a chain of events that now not only got rid of Hamas, well, Hamas has been toppled. They'll never be the same again. We'll hope so. Hezbollah has been defended. Syria regime has fallen. The Houthis are still a problem, but they can be dealt with later. And now Iran itself is falling apart. So I think we just need to take notice. Like God, I think is gracious to his people. I think God is protecting his people, and he's allowing the Jewish people to defend themselves so they're not destroyed. Um, so this preemptive strike is Israel's way to defend themselves. So what is the end goal? They've been targeting military sites, nuclear sites. I have seen Benjamin Netanyahu in news broadcasts calling to the Iranian people to rise up. Also, to this is their moment of freedom. Um, what is the end goal here?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk in the last 24, 48 hours about whether regime change is the end goal. I think I'll get to that in a moment because I don't think that's actually the primary objective of this war. But before I explain why, I'll explain what I do think is the primary objective. We need to keep our eye on the ball here. Israel does seem to be arguing this and is trying to do the same. The primary objective, the end goal, is to deprive Iran of its nuclear program and its ability to weaponize that nuclear program to create a nuclear weapon. The challenge that Israel faces in reaching that end goal is that they can and have attacked many different nuclear facilities in Iran, but there is one nuclear facility that they cannot attack by themselves, using at least not using their air force, and that is the Fordo nuclear facility. The primary reason why is that it is buried underneath a mountain, essentially. So it it's not just that it's a very fortified position; is that it's a fortified position buried underneath a mountain. So you would have to penetrate many layers of rock and concrete in order to actually drop a bomb on this facility and destroy it. The only weapon capable of doing so, at least as is reported right now, is a massive ordnance penetration or something like that. It's a 30,000 pound bomb that is referred to as a bunker buster, colloquially. Only the US has one of these, and it's never been used in wartime. So it's a very rare, special kind of weapon, and Israel does not have one of their own. They do have many weapons that the US has sold them. We've not given them one of these. So if they were to try to attack this facility from the air, Israel would need to have one of these weapons from the United States. Beyond that, unfortunately, it's not just that they need a very, very big bomb that they don't have access to. They also need a very, very big plane to carry that very, very big
Right.
bomb because an F 35 is just not going to be able to carry a 30,000 pound bomb. So you would need access to a strategic bomber, probably the B 2 stealth bomber that the US has, and Israel does not have any of these planes.
Yeah,
What that
search
means,
this plane, guys. Like it's a really cool plane. It looks like a hawk. It's really really cool.
yeah, it is really, really cool. And what this means really is that you would necessarily need to have one of these planes, and you would also need to have either the support of the United States in terms of the US carrying out this airstrike themselves, or the US would need to loan one of these planes with a
Yeah, what do
massive
you
bomb
think about
strapped to
that?
it.
Do you think it's possible that Israel could get this planes lent to them?
I I think anything is possible. I
Yeah.
also think there is historic precedent for this, and I've heard some make the argument on I think it's on Call Me Back podcast, Dan Senor's podcast. I've heard Amy Segal make this argument that, well, Franklin Roosevelt loaned out military equipment before he was able to convince the U.S. to jump into the war, essentially in World War II. But that's a very long time ago. I don't think
Right.
there's any recent precedent. Certainly not something as dramatic as giving out one of our most secretive and rare special bombers and a 30,000 pound bomb. We don't ordinarily do that. So I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that that would be the solution. The other the other solution that is kind of being whispered about a little bit is that if Israel does enough damage to Iran's military infrastructure, then they could also airlift a certain amount of special operatives into Iran, enter this underground fortress, really, a nuclear facility, and then destroy it from within using foot soldiers. But that is also an incredibly risky operation to undertake. So that's kind of where we're at. That's the primary end goal, the prize that everyone has their eyes on right now and is trying to figure out how is this going to work, because Israel claims they have the ability to handle this on their own, but everyone knows that realistically it would be much easier if they had US support. Are they actually going to be able to finish the job and take out this facility? It's a bit of a question mark right now that everyone's waiting on pins and needles to find out. Now, to the point about regime change, I do want to address this briefly. And why am I personally of the opinion that that's not the primary reason why this is happening? A couple of things. One, the the government had the ability to assassinate the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, on Thursday, and they didn't do it. That would have been the perfect opportunity. If you really want to overthrow the regime in one fell swoop, the perfect opportunity would have been to assassinate the commanders of the IRGC and the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution at the same time, and then they didn't do it. So it seems as if that wasn't really their primary objective to force regime change to happen. It also looks like right now, if you're just sort of reading the assessments or the statements coming from both the US administration and from Israel, there's a lot of back and forth on whether the Ayatollah could be a target in the future, but there's nothing definitive. There's no commitment to regime change either from the US administration or from the Israeli government. So it doesn't seem as if that would be a primary objective. If it was, I think they would be a bit more clear that that's what they're trying to do. They are encouraging some people in Iran to, protest or to try to evacuate to get out of harm's way, things of that nature. They are, as I mentioned, attacking different installations which are associated with the regime and responsible for helping to oppress the Iranian people. But I think the purpose there is less in order to force regime change to happen, because it's almost an afterthought. When questioned, most officials don't have a good answer for whether they want it or what the day after would even look like. More so, I think the purpose of putting pressure on the Iranian regime is to bring them back to the negotiating table and to force them to surrender before this war lasts for weeks. Because it could, in theory, last for a couple more weeks at least if Iran doesn't surrender and Israel continues to pursue their objective to the end.
Yeah, and reminder to our listeners again, Israel historically likes short wars. The amount of soldiers that they have is limited. They're a small country. They want to do fast, short wars like the Six Day War. This you see how this 2 year war with Hamas has been really devastating for people who have been in Gaza as reservists 3, 4, 5 times. It's really rough. On when it comes to IRGC, this is how tyrannical governments support themselves. They find that, like, Venezuela is a tyrannical government that uses narco trafficking as a way to support themselves. North Korea too. They use money laundering, drug trafficking to support themselves. In Iran, they use oil. So if anybody has seen that show Tehran, which is a really cool show you should be watching right now, it's on Apple TV. They show how these people live. The family members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they live like millionaires. They have Lamborghinis, Bugattis. They live in mansions. They're secular. They live an incredible lifestyle. So, Josiah, if the if they wanted to do regime change, and if Israel really wanted to make a difference here, why not target the oil, the money making source for Iran? Why not target its oil production capabilities? Keeping in mind that Iran already attacked the Israeli oil refinery in Haifa.
So they did attack the Haifa refinery, and I think it's worth noting that Israel did respond with a similar
Yes.
attack. So there was attack on gas depots, an oil refinery, things of that nature. They haven't attacked the biggest refineries or really the heart of the Iranian oil and gas economy yet. To answer your question, why have they not attacked those yet? I think it's a few things. One, it's 85% of the Iranian economy. So if they really wanted to, they could bring the regime absolutely to its knees if they took out the heartbeat of the Iranian economy. But you have to bear in mind that it's not just the heartbeat of the Iranian economy, it's also the heartbeat, or sorry, not just the heartbeat of the IRGC economy, but also the heartbeat of the Iranian economy as a whole, or the country of Iran. The people of Iran rely on it. So there's a couple of things that I think are at play here in terms of restraining Israel from just absolutely destroying Iran's economy. One, if you were to do that, Israel would risk a lot of international backlash. Right now, they're enjoying the support of the United States and the US administration, but there's a lot of concern in the United States about what would the impact of an all-out war in Iran be, especially if it did totally destroy the oil infrastructure, the natural gas, all of that. Gas prices could skyrocket in the United States. All of a sudden, you have major domestic political concerns about whether President Trump could sustain a war with Iran in the face of intense domestic political pressure if something were to happen, like gas prices going crazy high. So I think Israel's smart. They know this. They understand this, that if you want the US to stay on your side and to continue to support you in going down this path, then you have to make the cost as small as possible for the average American in terms of what this war could mean. You also have to keep in mind, I think Israel is keeping in mind their own domestic political concerns, because every time that you engage in an attack on energy infrastructure, it's going to open up or set the precedent that would allow Iran to escalate further and also do the same thing to Israel's energy infrastructure. So Israel has its concerns as well about its own people. They don't want gas prices in Israel going crazy high. They don't want there to be any sort of emergency because the power goes out and all of a sudden, everything from healthcare to public transportation could go down. So there's reasons why that represents an escalation that Israel probably doesn't want to happen, even if it would speed things up in terms of bringing the regime down. The last thing that I would say is that it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense given the rhetoric that Israel has been pursuing about its outreach to the Iranian people. They are no fans of the Iranian regime, obviously, but Israel and the Iranian people for many years did have a relatively good relationship. And there does seem to be some belief that that could be restored in the event that the Islamic regime's power was reduced or even taken away completely. But it would be very, very difficult to establish any sort of goodwill or restoration of relationship between Israel and the Iranian people if you completely destroyed their economy in one blow. If
Yeah.
if just hypothetically the regime were to fall, the people of Iran are going to need some sort of resources to work with in order to put the pieces back together, rebuild their country, and have a day after plan. And I don't think it would be in Israel's best interest right now to take that away from the people of Iran.
Yeah, the Israelis, as you just said, had great relationships with the Iranian people from 1950 until 1979, and the dream would be one day for the Persian people to have democracy and once again to be friends with the Jewish people. Imagine these two. This is what Netanyahu has been saying. These two ancient people since Cyrus the Great, Jews and Persians working together. But truly, imagine that. Imagine the oil reserves that Iran has without sanctions, so being really plugged into the world's economy, plus Israeli intelligence, Israeli startup nation support, it would be an incredible power couple. And I think Israel is trying to keep that open as well for its peacemaking intentions with the Sunni Arab Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and others there. So
Yeah, that's a good
um,
point.
when it comes to regime change, I want to say a little joke that reminded by Forrest Gump that regime change is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get. The Americans were involved in regime change in Iran when the only democratically elected official there, Mohammad Mossadegh, was toppled by. And you guys know this from the book All the Shah's Men. There's a movie about it too. That the British intelligence, American intelligence were involved in toppling the democratic elected leader of Iran in 1953 to put back in charge the Reza Pahlavi, the king, the Shah of Iran. And that didn't turn out well because later that gave rise to the Islamic Revolution. So it's best to not get too involved in regime change because, again, you don't know what you're going to get. Okay, so we covered what Israel has done, the why now. Now, it's been a week of the war this week. By the time you guys see this episode, it's been a week already. So, how long will the fighting last, Josiah? And please address the issue of the missiles. So, Iran has about 2,000 missiles, or had 2,000 missiles. Tell us how many have they lost, how many have they fired. And it seems like the first night they launched like 200, then like 150, then 70. The last few nights have been like 10, 20. So is are they running out of missiles? Is that the time clock that we can watch? How long would this fighting last?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think a lot of people are looking at this and assuming that it's a simple war of attrition. The first person to run out of supplies is going to be the one that wins or loses the war, rather. I would say I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. In that, yes, Iran is burning through their stockpile, both because they have fired several hundred. Israel supposedly has taken out some additional stores in some of its airstrikes, and it has a finite number to work with. But we also have to keep in mind that Israel has a finite number of interceptors to work with. So Israel also has an interest in trying to make sure that this doesn't drag on to the very end of the supplies that both sides have. And that's not really a safe strategy to pursue in terms of how long the war lasts. I think it's better to set clear end goals and then set an end date for the war based on when you think you can accomplish those goals. Now, the question is, how quickly is Israel going to be able to accomplish those objectives or those goals, which are, again, primarily the destruction of Iran's nuclear program. Everything else is really primarily about weakening the military power of the regime or its ability to fight back, but it's really in service of a primary objective of removing its ability to become a nuclear power. The the question as far as how long it would take Israel to do that, again, comes back to what needs to be done in order to get Fordo destroyed. And there's two possible outcomes that Israel could pursue at this point. One being they convince the US to get involved, the US handles it, and this is over pretty quickly, probably within 48 hours. It would be done if the US were to launch a very large bombing campaign of their own. The alternative is that Israel has to continue doing this and fight it out and hope that they either figure out some way to do it on their own or that they can put enough pressure on Iran and the regime to come back to the negotiating table. And at this point, it's not entirely clear what is the most likely scenario. If you listen to President Trump right now, he's talking very tough. He's moving a lot of military hardware to the region, most of which it's pretty obvious, the purpose of moving an aircraft carrier group and a bunch of refueling tankers and some of these strategic bombers to the region is if you're going to launch a massive bombing campaign. So it's pretty clear that he has the pieces in place and has put the pieces in place in order to get the US directly involved if he decides to do that. What is much less clear is if he actually wants the US to get involved. You're hearing a lot of tough rhetoric, but you're also hearing a lot about him continuing to weigh his options and wanting to sort of wait and see if maybe he can get the Iranians back to the table. At this point, in the last 24 hours, most of his rhetoric has basically suggested that he would be open to negotiations if there's an unconditional surrender first. So Iran basically has to commit to coming to the table and accepting US terms as opposed to stalling for more time than they have been the last 3 months. So I think there is still a diplomatic path forward that could also potentially maybe help speed things up a little bit. It would take longer than a quick US bombing campaign, but doesn't necessarily mean 2 to 3 more weeks. But until it is clear, I don't think Iran is at a spot yet where they're ready to negotiate. So until it's clear whether the US is going to get involved to put more military pressure on Iran, I think it's safer to assume status quo. Until something changes, it's probably going to take another couple weeks. And then if something does change, you could see things unfold very quickly and speed up quite a bit.
Yeah, so we have seen the Iranians talk real tough outwardly, right? But internally, it seems one of the latest reporting, Josiah. I know you've been in meetings today, but before I logged in here, I checked the news. It seems like the presidential plane of Iran has departed towards Oman. Allegedly, maybe they're trying to negotiate. Start Oman has been like the mediator for the United States and Iran. Also, Trump has increasingly become like he likes winners. Israel's winning right now, and I think he wants to be on the winning team. And he has escalated his rhetoric to last night, saying that he expects an unconditional surrender from Iran. So yeah, we'll see if the United States will get involved. Um, Anything else you want to say? We have some prayer points that we would like for you guys to think about. Anything else you want to say about this situation, Josiah?
No, I think that about covers it. I appreciate the chance to get back and speak with you again, Sebastian. It was a really interesting way to spend paternity leave, just watching things unfold. But I think these are truly historic times. I'm glad we had the opportunity to chat about it because it's a really important subject. A lot is at stake here, both in terms of the future of the Middle East and in the coming weeks, I'm sure we'll have a lot of conversations about how this will reshape the region, but also in the immediate short term, a lot at stake, of course, in terms of human lives. And so, again, I think this conversation is so important. I thank you for joining me and having this conversation. And I would love it if you would close by giving us some prayer points to reflect on.
Yeah. So, friends, of course, we want to be praying for Israeli civilians. We want to be praying for people who really are being barraged. They're being woken up in the middle of the night. Uh, Missiles are falling all over the place. Entire neighborhoods are being taken out. So, we need to be praying for the Lord to protect Israeli civilians, for the Lord to protect Israeli soldiers as they're doing operations. Just to highlight, this whole situation that Israel is in with Hamas is because they take in hostages. So imagine what would happen if an Israeli pilot gets captured and is taken hostage. We need to pray for that as well. I wanted to tell our listeners, our audience, our Passages alumni that Passages just finished our rounds for the summer, our 3 rounds. We have one more in late July. We hope to do so. Join us in prayer for that we can do this, our first ever young professionals trip to Israel this summer. But we finished some college rounds in the last few weeks, and the last plane that left Israel was one of our participant groups was there, and we got to visit Majal Shams. Majal Shams is this community in the north of Israel where a group of kids were playing soccer, and a Hezbollah rocket fell and killed them all. So we were able, on your behalf, to visit this community to show them that Christians care about them because they're Druze, Druze. They're Druze people, and they presented us with a little soccer ball to our CEO Zach with the faces of the kids, their names. We made a financial donation to them to support them to rebuild. Also, in the last DC conference that we did last January, you guys who are watching this put together kits, kits for kids, we called it, which are PTSD kits for children to deal. A lot of children are spending a lot of time in these bunkers, and there are these kids that help them deal with the anxiety that you Christian college students helped put together, and you delivered just a couple of weeks ago. So they were very timely. We delivered hundreds of these kits, and 400 more are on their way right now, thanks to our partnership with Artists for Israel and Healing Kits. So pray for these kids, pray for Israeli civilians, pray for American service people. We have thousands of American service men and women around the region. Pray for their safety, and pray for peace. Sometimes Israel is faced with this difficult decision to do a preemptive strike for the sake of saving millions of lives in the future. So, but we should be praying for peace, that the Lord will change the hearts of the evil people who in whose hands it is the decision to make peace, like the United Arab Emirates, who made peace with Israel, and now they have peace, and they were never really a war, but they normalized relationships. So this could be the future of Israel and Iran if they decide to make peace. Also for the church, we want to pray for the church to rise up in Iran. I always hear from people, I'm not sure how true this is, that Iran has the fastest growing underground church in the world. So we want to pray for believers in Iran to share the gospel, to be the light to people, to comfort, to be kind and generous to people around them. So we want to pray for Christians in Iran, Christians in Israel. And finally, this is very important, y'all, we must not forget about the hostages. We need to keep praying for the hostages, that the Israeli government will be able to do a deal with Hamas, with Qatar soon enough, that Hamas will finally give up, that they will see like they have nobody else coming to save them. Literally, all of their allies have been eliminated by Israel. So We pray for the safety of the hostages. Last weekend in Washington, D.C., we brought a survivor, Yair Horn, who spent 498 days in captivity, and he shared his story to our high school participants. And also, we brought a friend, Noah, who's advocating for her friends who've been there for now 621 days in captivity. So we must not forget about the hostages, pray for them as well. So lots to pray for. Thank you for watching this. If you guys have any other questions about what you want to cover, any questions you have for Josiah, please let us know in the comments, because we're going to continue tracking this. We're going to continue to do episodes, and look out for the notes, for the resources, which will help you understand more of the content as well. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Passages Pulse. Help us grow this community by liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you like this week's episode, let us know by leaving a comment below. This podcast is a project of Passages Israel. We exist to educate the next generation of Christians on modern Israel, deepen the roots of their faith, and equip leaders to foster positive Christian engagement with Israel and the Jewish people. To learn more about Passages, follow us on social media or visit us at passagesisrael.org. Until next time, we'll keep our finger on the pulse.